Hello, my name is Narayanan Ganapathy and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Bambucorn Limited, an equity crowdfunding platform that has recently obtained a license, an innovation testing license from the Dubai Financial Services Authority that enables startups and SMEs raise equity financing by issuing tokenized securities. Bambucorn is also authorized for participation in the FinTech regulatory sandbox of the Central Bank of Bahrain and has been granted the authorization to operate as a securities tokenization platform whilst in the sandbox. The online alternative finance industry has witnessed substantial growth, a trend that has accelerated rapidly in the recent years. Whilst the base in the Middle East is certainly low, the strong compounded annual growth rate of 93% is a significant indicator of where the industry is headed going forward. Up until now, there are 5 alternative financing models that have dominated the Middle East industry: the P2P business lending, P2P consumer lending, P2B property lending, invoice trading, and equity crowdfunding. The total size of the market of alternative financing in the Middle East was a total of $800 million, a fraction of the global market size. So Israel has been at the helm of the industry, having recorded the highest volume in MENA in 6 out of the 9 alternative financing models, with UAE coming on top in 2 out of the 9 models. Ensuring the strength and vitality of the SME sector is seen as priority for policymakers in the Middle East, and online alternative financing platforms have grown to become the best funding mechanism for startups, entrepreneurs, and the small and medium enterprises in the region. Some of the aspects we need to look at to understand the crowdfunding industry in the Middle East are as follows. Number 1, who are the real key users of crowdfunding platforms in the region? Investor activity is one of the key drivers of crowdfunding here in the Middle East. And when I say investor activity, what I mean is the engagement and collaboration by investor community with crowdfunding platforms. The percentage institutionalization across all alternative financing methods has been a meager 11.8%. But in equity crowdfunding though, it's been slightly higher at 21%. Number 2, what are the key R&D initiatives that crowdfunding platforms are pursuing? Amongst others, some of the R&D initiatives are: 1, community management features and tools. Number 2, social media and promotional fundraising. And number 3, customer relationship management. And lastly, how international are these alternative financing platforms here in the Middle East? Overall, only 10% of the business is attributable to cross-border inflows, whereas in equity crowdfunding platforms, it is 73% that is attributable to cross-border inflows. This is largely a result of the deep interest in Israeli equity crowdfunding platforms from investors in the US and Europe. Now let me give you an overview of the regulatory landscape of crowdfunding in the Middle East. I must say that the changing regulations over the recent past have provided an additional impetus to the crowdfunding industry in the region in general, and also contributed meaningfully to the overall growth in the alternative financing industry in the Middle East. In Bahrain, the Central Bank of Bahrain issued regulations for both equity and debt crowdfunding platforms towards 2017 for both conventional and Sharia. And they made some amendments to it towards end of 2018. Zooming in on some of the equity regulations here in Bahrain, let me give you some of the features. Issuers issuing securities through equity crowdfunding platforms based in Bahrain may be based anywhere in the world, but the only thing they need to ensure is that they comply with the local laws of the jurisdictions where they're established, and also the fact that the issuance must not be listed in multiple crowdfunding platforms. For Islamic equity issuances through crowdfunding platforms, a Sharia advisor needs to be appointed by the operator to ensure that the structure and the documentation complies with the Sharia Islamic principles. The limit in terms of the maximum amount an issuer can raise through an equity crowdfunding platform based in Bahrain is Bahraini dinars 250,000, which is the equivalent of US dollar 662,000. And for real estate issuers, the limit is Bahraini dinars 500,000, which is the equivalent of US dollars 1.32 million. Both accredited and expert investors may be able to invest through equity crowdfunding platforms in Bahrain. In the UAE, the Dubai Financial Services Authority issued regulations for investment, loan, and property crowdfunding platforms in late 2017. One of the striking features of the regulations is that investments are open to both professional and retail investors. There's no limit for investments by professional investors at all, whilst for retail investors, the limit is 50,000 US dollars in a given calendar year. Issuers may issue up to $5 million if they're carrying out an issuance through a crowdfunding platform, so long as the offering meets the definition of an exempt offer. What's an exempt offer? One of the conditions for an offering to meet the definition of an exempt offer is, number one, the offering has to necessarily take place through an investment crowdfunding platform or a property crowdfunding platform operated by a crowdfunding operator. Offerings may be made only to investors who are clients of the crowdfunding operator. And number three, there are no specific restrictions in terms of the geography of where the investors or the issuers are located, so long as the KYC requirements of the regulator are complied with. In addition to the DFSA, the UAE Central Bank launched regulations in late 2020 for loan crowdfunding platforms based onshore. Some of the key features are minimum capital requirements differ based on whether the platforms are categorized as small companies or large companies. Borrowers have to be UAE registered companies, and lenders may be either retail lenders or market counterparties. In Saudi Arabia, the Central Bank of Saudi Arabia, which is the Saudi Arabian Monetary Agency, issued regulations in early 2021 for debt-based crowdfunding platforms, which requires them to have a minimum capital of 5 million Saudi riyals, which is approximately US dollar 1.33 million. On the other hand, the Capital Markets Authority, which is a governmental financial services regulatory authority, is responsible for supervising and regulating organizations in the capital market. The CMA has its own regulatory sandbox, it's called FinTech Lab, that allows for early-stage equity crowdfunding platforms to operate under experimental licensing options. The only condition is that the issuers need to be closed joint stock companies before the campaign begins in order for it to be compliant with the Saudi companies law. So Oman's Capital Markets Authority is exploring various fintech initiatives, including implementing a distributed ledger technology for the Thaqaful and insurance sector, as well as implementing its own crowdfunding platform. SME crowdfunding platform is top of the agenda for Oman for this year, as it's in line with the Oman 2040 vision to focus on SMEs and as part of its diversification plan. So with all of those regulations and the recent developments in the alternative financing industry in the Middle East, where do I think is the crowdfunding industry headed towards? I recently read a survey, a very interesting one, conducted amongst investors in one of the countries in the Gulf, where 80% of the investors cited the potential for fraud, and a third of them cited absence of regulations as the key reasons why they are not investing through crowdfunding platforms. Now clearly, because this survey was conducted prior to the regulations coming into force, one would expect that. But with now, crowdfunding regulations having come into force in several of the Middle Eastern countries, hopefully, all of these concerns amongst the investors are allayed. And I'd love to see a consistent and strong growth in the crowdfunding platforms going forward, particularly taking into consideration the online way, the COVID-driven online way of living that people are slowly getting used to. And in the time to come, we'll see the crowdfunding industry hopefully prosper.